Okay. On the line, we have Ryan Apple Labriola, the CEO and founder of Pittsburgh Embers. We've brought him on today, obviously, because of the controversy that's gone on in the Challenger League or of Rainbow Six right now with his roster of the Pittsburgh Embers. I brought him on today to get his views and his side of the story before I speak to the other people as well and get everybody's side of the story so we can get a more of a overall view of what's going on. And, you know, I feel like people may jump to conclusions one way or the other, so this is a great opportunity to get everybody's side of the story. So, Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself, tell everyone where you're from?
Yeah, hi Darren, thanks for having me on. So I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, obviously, working on a hometown project here with the Pittsburgh Embers, and sadly we're dealing with this current situation, but I'm happy to express and answer any questions that I can for you so provide clarity to this situation.
Well, if you'd just like to give everybody like a brief overview of what's happening, obviously when you when you decided to come into the space, you found this roster, you brought them into the scene, if you just give us a brief overview there, and then I'll ask questions as we go.
Sure, so with our Rainbow Six team, they actually approached us initially a few months back. They approached us via Twitter saying that, they were looking for organization representation for the upcoming season of Challenger League. Obviously, the team wasn't in Challenger League yet at that point in time. They were a rather young and inexperienced team, all in their, they were all over 18, but they're all in their early 20s, 19, 20, 21, that type group. And effectively, when they approached us and said all the things that we were looking for, which is that for a Challenger League team, we were, really not interested in a paid salary team for Challenger League, as we thought the Challenger League doesn't have the type of exposure that would warrant it, and we were interested in giving them other incentives, but we were also interested in signing them to a multi-season length contract.
Okay. So
primarily 2 seasons.
When you say other incentives, what sort of incentives were we talking?
So bonuses, revenue splits for things like apparel that they were involved in, if it was using things like player likeness, things like that. We were offering them to take 0% of the prize pool, so they would keep 100% of the prize pool that they earned, which was important to us, as what we do with all of our teams, actually. So that's number one. Number two, also, given that it was a multi-season length contract, there was bonuses if they were to be promoted to Pro League at the end of Challenger League Season 10. There was also salary that was pre-negotiated for Pro League for that following season.
Are you able to disclose what that salary or arrange what that salary was?
So for Pro League Season 11, if they had been promoted, it was pre-negotiated to be $2,000 per player per month.
Okay, because that is obviously quite low.
Yeah, and we knew that ahead of time. So they discussed it with us. We were talking about, what they were looking at, and they said that they understood that if they would be promoted, they'd be at the low end of the expectation for Pro League. And, we basically told them, reasonably speaking, we said, okay, look, if we're going to enter into an agreement that's multiple seasons long, we have to know that we have the funding to support it today, right? So if this can't be and again, I know that you've talked about before, and we're concerned about this too, organizations that make promises that they can't keep.
Correct.
Right? So we approached it from the perspective of saying, look, if we're going to enter into this agreement and we know that, okay, Pro League lasts, 2-3 months, we have to pay out this salary for, 3 months maximum, let's say, during, the actual league play of Pro League, then, it's $10,000 per month basically for this team. We need to have that money already in the bank to pay out to them. We can't be relying on a sponsor coming in while they're in Challenger League, let's say. Yeah.
Because obviously there was some back and forth. So,
right.
I've read some things where, you've said sponsors are coming in and that, will affect the future, or which is with any organization. Sure. Obviously, not every organization has huge investments. Sure. The only thing that stands out to me is obviously I went through the Pro League with my team, went through the Challenger League and went and got to the Pro League. We did pay our players. Obviously, I take the stance that where I find it very hard to ask anybody to do anything for nothing. So were the players given any other incentives? Were they given peripherals? Were they given
things? So they were given, things like apparel, right?
What type of apparel? Are we talking
obviously.
Jerseys? Are we talking
jerseys? So they're given jerseys, which was important to them that they wanted, which we were happy to provide to them, obviously. But beyond that, primarily just promotion. Obviously, these are very, very lesser known players, so to speak, because of their position. And so it was more about for them, and this was important to them, as they stated before, if they wanted to stream, things like that, doing promotions for them or doing giveaways that involved them, like we did a signed controller with Forrest because he came over from Xbox, things like that. So we involved them in that to try to gain them some exposure through us, obviously. And on top of that, there was actually a sponsor that we were working with that's an endemic sponsor that's in the peripheral space primarily, and we've actually entirely lost that contract because of the fact that the team has decided to separate from us.
Right.
They were watching that situation. We made them aware of it ahead of time so that they weren't caught off guard by it, but we were in the process of signing that agreement with them, and they basically decided to put that discussion on hold, and then afterwards told us that they're going to put it on hold indefinitely as of right now because of the current situation. Not that,
Obviously, being a smaller, a new organization, that endemic sponsor, I can't imagine that would have been worth any amount of money that would have been able to cover the cost of the players. Is that be correct? So that would
that's correct. But again, this is important to note. We didn't make any promises to the players about saying, okay, well, if we get this sponsor to come on board, that we're going to make any adjustments to your agreement, right? Our agreement is what it is. We don't offer to say, okay, well, if we're bringing in $10,000 a month in sponsorship revenue that we didn't have before, we're going to attribute that to the team. So we're going to give each player 5% of that. Like that's not how our contracts are written. That's not how any organization really works with their agreements, unless it's a direct benefit from the players that's brought to the organization.
You did mention before, obviously, that you in that contract that you offered some sort of revenue share. Obviously, everybody knows the pilot program in Rainbow Six is can be very lucrative. And it's very, subject to very small teams. So what sort of revenue share, obviously being a Challenger League team, that route to that pilotship program is very, very far away. So what sort, when you're talking about merchandise revenue, you're talking about like physical merchandise that you'd sell or?
Physical merchandise.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just factored in to say that basically if we're doing anything directly as a promotion with that player, that we'll give them 10% of the direct profit from that proceed of merchandise, basically. And that's all funded through the organization directly.
I've got this written down. So it was like it was 0% from any prize pools. So that's what you take. What sort of revenue? Obviously in the contract, was there anything to do? I haven't seen the contract, so I have to. Whatever you tell me is is the information that I have. What sort of revenue share were you talking? Was there anything in there that said towards the play if the player had an in-game item or an in-game?
So in-game items, so Ubisoft obviously does regulate talking about a certain percentage of the share has to be put aside directly for the players, right? So we're following Ubisoft's guidelines.
Okay.
On that. So whatever share is designated for the organization is coming into us, and we're not giving the players a share of that, and anything that's designated for them is paid directly to them.
So where did the problems begin? Because obviously it seems like from looking at it from an outside point of view, it seems like the team performed rather well and made it to the Challenger League. And then that's when the problems seem to begin. Did they? So what happened? Did they come back and be like, "We're in the Challenger League now. We want money"?
Well, so what happened really was actually a week or two before the Challenger League qualifier, where we managed to qualify. They approached us about looking at their agreement and starting to make revisions in the event that they did make Challenger League, as they felt like that it wasn't really beneficial for them anymore if they were to make Challenger League. And we told them that, look, if you make Challenger League, we're more than happy to sit down and discuss it. We're obviously in no way obligated to renegotiate on anything, and they knew that, and we made that very clear to say, they felt like they were entitled to a renegotiation. They're not.
Do you not think that would be a red flag? I mean, most of these players, I know I sit down with my players and I read the contract. I make sure they all know what they're talking about and all know what they're signing, and we're very open book about it. Do you not by making it so prominently clear that you don't have to do this, that would start bringing up red flags to them? Like, because obviously there's a bit of, there has been a bit of past in there, and there's been a couple of other, news articles that have come out in a non-favorable light. Do you not think that may have kickstarted that?
Here's the thing, right? Something to make abundantly clear, and I've provided screenshots of those conversations as well with Fozo on Discord. The players were all aware of the Fabian situation much in advance of this entire conversation ever happening. So the conversation of saying any of our past or any of my past had any influence over this, and the fact that they are using this as a clause to basically say the way that the team cited to say that they were quote unquote resigning, which obviously our agreement doesn't allow for resignation or unilateral termination, so that's not valid. But either way, when they claimed that they were resigning, they cited the force majeure clause of our agreement, right? Which
Isn't that more for like natural disasters?
Correct. Yeah, or war breaking out, things like that, right?
Has that
Or a
happened
labor
any?
controversy, meaning like that there's a labor strike or something,
Okay.
right? So the thing that they cited was, and in their letter, which I'm also happy to provide to you if you'd like a copy of, the letter that they provided to us basically said, that they're citing the force majeure clause of their agreement because of a labor controversy, and they're basically citing that the controversy of what happened at Fibion has caused them mental distress to where now they're leaving, right? Again, they were made aware of the situation actually before they signed their agreements. We mentioned it to them. We explained it to them. They were on board with everything. We fully disclosed everything with them. And then again, this came up because somebody came up to them in a Rainbow Six match and said something to them about us not paying players, whatever. And they GeForce experienced it, I guess, and clipped the information that this person was telling them, brought it to my attention. I had a 4 or 5 hour long conversation with them, and ultimately they said that they were good, and that's shown in the screenshots. We sent them a copy of 1099 from one of our Rocket League players back with Fabian with their personal information redacted to show that we did indeed pay the amount that they were owed, and we sent that to them, and he said, okay, yeah, we're
Was
good.
there a delay in that payment, or what was the issue there?
There wasn't.
Okay.
The issue with Fabian had to do with basically poaching that was really going on with Evil Geniuses, and that's a story for another time that I'm happy to discuss. But ultimately, the claim of delays has to do with the fact that they felt like they were still entitled to the salary that they would be owed in November of that month when this situation happened or October, sorry, when this situation happened at the end of September, and we suspended their pay for October because of the situation.
Right.
So it has, but again, the claims were that they never got paid, which isn't true.
Okay.
And we proved that to the players, and they were happy with that. We moved forward. And then come months later, when we're in these discussions to say, okay, well, are we going to renegotiate anything or not? When we proposed changes that they weren't, I guess, happy with, which it seemed like they were, and then we didn't hear anything back from them, they decided to cite this clause to say, okay, well, we're going to pretend like we didn't know about this, and this is causing us stress.
So when they came, sat down once they made it, did they ask for, when they revised the contract, did they ask for salary? Did they ask for a specific number? Was there anything that would have, made them happy to stay on the Embers?
So they were looking for, in Challenger League, $500 to $600 per player per month.
Okay.
That's what they approached us with. It took a while to get that specific number out of them because I think that they didn't quite know exactly what they wanted. They were citing the fact that basically other teams in Challenger League that had made it to that point or were in Challenger League who were being paid either, Disrupt or Rise. And they were also citing the fact that, to their knowledge, and again, this hasn't happened yet, and, not to disclose anything private or anything, I know that, for instance, there was a rumor going around that Obey was going to be signing Two-Faced, which had also made it into NACL, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were prominently aware of that. Apparently, their agent is the same agent of our players, Chris T.Y. Tangles, and he made it clear to them that allegedly their offers were in that ballpark of what they were getting, and so they basically felt like that we should be revising to make.
Is that not something that if you were heavily invested into this team, a $500, $2,000 a month, the Challenger League series is pretty short. Is that not something that you may have thought, I've got some bad history. Maybe I'll just, this is a small investment. I believe in this team going forward, that this would be, quite an easy sell.
We could. The primary issue was the fact that we haven't acquired any additional funding since we signed the agreement.
Right.
And again, we had the funding in place for the agreement, for the length of the agreement, given the fact that they would make it into Pro League.
Right. So,
but we didn't want to make promises.
Say they went on a crazy win streak and they made it to Pro League next season.
Sure.
Is that money set aside already?
Yes, it's already set aside.
If that money's already set aside, why couldn't we just pay them?
Why couldn't we just reallocate it? Because if we reallocated it and then we didn't acquire the funding to pay them in Pro League, we'd have to drop them in Pro League, or we wouldn't pay them, and then we'd be.
But from an org standpoint, you would be in a much better situation, because if they did, one, the bad press wouldn't be there, right? And then if you did give them the money and they made it to Pro League and you didn't, acquire any additional funding, then you could have, sold that team onto another team that wanted to be in the Pro League.
Sure, but again, that's a choice of argument to say, what position you want to be in, right? And for us, it was important to say that we have the money set aside for the agreement that we originally signed, right? And also, frankly, to be honest with you, and again, I agree with you from the perspective of saying that, players shouldn't play for nothing, right?
Exactly.
Especially if they're in a setting where this is their full-time job, obviously, right? In the
Yes.
case of things like Pro League, right? I applaud what you're doing in terms of providing housing and things like that for your players as well, right? It's important. But for things like Challenger League, it's for us, it's not there, right? And it's not about trying to do it on a shoestring or not.
But it
It's
is an
about saying
investment.
that, yeah, it is.
I
But
mean,
the thing is
I
that,
made
I
that
mean,
gamble on my team that I was going to invest that amount of money, which was a lot more than $2,000 a month,
sure.
to make it to the Pro League. But I know once they, if we made, I didn't want my players to be, okay, once you make it, do all the work for nothing, and once you make it, we'll make it worth your while. I mean, it just seems strange to me that, you could have, all this could have been avoided if you just gave them $500 a month for 6 weeks, and then if they'd made it, they didn't make it, out of that,
I mean,
that three, because let's be fair, the Pro League, lasts 6 months?
mm-hmm.
So that's a $60,000 investment that you're going to have to put in there. To take $2,000, to take even $5,000 out of that,
Sure.
seems like a very small risk to take.
Sure.
Again, the last thing that you guys need, any organization wants, is bad press. And
Sure.
If somebody told me,
this is a point that I want to make before you continue further, right? Is to say that again, we were in the middle of these conversations, and they chose ultimately not to respond after we made formal changes, after we proposed formal changes, right?
Right. What specifically were those changes, though? I mean,
so yeah, the changes that we proposed, we had an automatic renewal function in our agreement at the end of the initial term that would have extended the term for an additional 12 months at our discretion, right? And we were willing to
at zero salary.
No, if they were in Challenger League, correct, at what it was currently negotiated at, yes. So that's what they were signed for, right? So we were willing to remove that automatic renewal term from the agreement, which was obviously a big deal, and we thought that was fair to remove, obviously, given the current state of things and given their success and given their concerns for the future, obviously. That as much as, again, that's effectively cutting our term in less than half, right?
Okay.
So we were willing to do that.
When was that contract due to run out? Was it?
I can tell you. Hold on. The initial agreement was signed as of May 31st, and it would have ended either a 12-month period or 14 days after the completion of Season 11, whichever came first for Pro League Season 11. And then there could have been another extension of a 12-month period after that, which was the automatic renewal clause. So we offered to remove that. We also offered to change, what else was it? We also offered to increase their Pro League salary, which we were going to be offering probably in the neighborhood. Well, we didn't really discuss it, so I'm actually not going to say that, but we were willing to discuss.
Is that an increase on top of the 2,000?
Yes.
Okay.
We were trying to offer to say that we could increase their salary on top of the 2,000. This was a discussion, and we went back and forth with this discussion to say, look, we think that the Pro League teams are worth more than what we initially offered, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, we are willing to take more of a gamble on that end to say that we thought that we could secure the investment in the meantime. But on that end, we discussed it with them, and we basically said they wanted to increase their Challenger League salary, and they wanted to also increase their Pro League salary, right?
Okay.
We said that we weren't really in a position where we could do both financially right now. And so we were willing to commit to an increased Pro League salary that we could discuss, or we could offer them, $300-400 per player per month in Challenger League currently, and we wouldn't be changing what we had offered them previously in Pro League if that was important to them, right?
But the landscape changes so quickly. I mean, if you made Pro League, maybe you sit down with Ubisoft, and they sit down with you and be like, we don't know what the league's going to be like next year. Mm-hmm. I just feel like it's like you've kind of shot yourself in the foot. It's like cutting your nose off to spite your face. I mean, I would never turn down and be like, okay, we'll give you money, but then I'm not renegotiating. The one thing I would always say is, especially to org owners and newer people into the thing, is yes, give the money. So if you're willing to give that $300-400, offer it, and then be like, we'll sit down at the end of the season and we'll renegotiate. We
didn't formally offer it in writing, but we did offer it over a phone call. Right. We did talk about it, and again, this is the thing. This was an ongoing conversation. This was a fluid document, right? They chose ultimately not to respond to it, and then a week later to come back and send us to say that they wanted to resign.
I feel like what's happened is obviously once they got the they heard the news of the whatever may have happened in the past. I've not looked into it deeply, so I'm not going to comment either way who is right, who is wrong. And the easiest way to, sort the situation out and, paper over the cracks would just be like, okay, I want to prove to you that I am serious on this team, and I'm willing to put that to, a $500 a month investment for 4 players is not a lot of money in the esports world. And I think a lot of people think that, esports businesses can be made on a shoestring, and now
they can't be.
They can't. You need millions of dollars if you're going to do it properly.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that doesn't sit with me, is the fact that this all could have been avoided if we on a $2,000 to $3,000 investment, and if the money was already available for the Pro League. And that would have been $60,000 to take a small percentage of that and give it to the players up front, and then sit down and reevaluate that. You would have made, even if you didn't carry on, if they made it to Pro League and you didn't carry on that investment, you would have, that spot you could have, I'm sure another org would have come in for that spot.
Yeah.
And then if they didn't make Pro League, you would have been out $2,000 to $3,000, but I guarantee you that the damage to the name is worth, the damage that has come out of this is worth a lot more than that. Yeah.
Yep. Correct. And again, another point to make, and again, as I've said before, this was by no means final, right? And there's nothing to be said about the fact that that we would or wouldn't have done whatever, right? Ultimately, they chose to end that conversation, right? Okay. And ultimately, I think another thing to point out to make very clear here, right, is again, we can talk about the what ifs in terms of, if we had done this or that, and maybe that would have been better for the organization or reputation damage, things like that. I fully agree with you, and we can talk about those scenarios, right? But ultimately, what happened, and I know that Jess, the former coach of Penta, made a comment about this on Twitter, and she's the only one who I've seen to actually really say this, which, I appreciate her coming out to say this, because I think a lot of people don't understand this. Again, the agreements are what they were, right? And ultimately speaking, the players were in the wrong here in the sense of they had no right to leave. And
so what is that? Are they still? Go ahead. In your opinion, so what is their situation right now? Are they still?
We haven't released their agreements, and we're not going to. Okay. So ultimately speaking, if another organization signs them, we'll send them a notice, because we can't make the assumption that they're aware of the situation, although they should be, right? But we can't legally make that assumption. So if another organization does sign them, we'll send them a notice to say, look, these players are still under contract with us, right? They may have told you otherwise, but this is the case. And if you choose to hold on to these agreements, then ultimately they're considered liable as well. Right?
Okay. Do they have a buyout in their contract right now, or is that not?
Our buyout is by negotiation only.
Right.
So we don't have a set number. And again, we're willing, we told them this before, we were willing to discuss that if that was what it came down to say, look, that they, only that they ultimately wanted to be bought out of their out of their contracts. We were willing to discuss that, right? But nobody came to us. And I guess one of the interesting things to note in this is that in the letters that they sent to us, they stated that they had already accepted a position with another organization. Okay, right. Which means that if that's the case, they were speaking to somebody entirely behind the organization's back, never having mentioned to us at all that this was ongoing, right? Which is, number one, tortious interference in contract law, right? But number two, that's just that's really unethical from any perspective, right. Also just in the esports perspective. And so I hope that that's not the case. They haven't actually formally signed with anybody yet that I've seen. It's not public information if it is, but that's sad, right? And ultimately it's unprofessional.
Where do you see the resolution here? What is your idea? Would you like them to sit down at a table with you and maybe renegotiate that 500 or that salary, and then push into the challenge, like forget all this ever happened and move forward and prove that that all those problems in the past are the past? Or are you looking now just to keep hold of them to the end of their contract, just out of?
Well, so here's the thing, right? So they're ultimately, as much as we're holding their contracts on paper, right? They're not going to be playing under the organization name, right, because stuff's not going to force them to. So ultimately, it has nothing to do with, whether they're going to be or not. It has to do, legally speaking, whether or not we have a right to exercise that or not, right? If we wanted to, so here's basically the path to describe, right? When we responded to them, our final response to them when they sent us that letter was to say that obviously their agreements were still in full force and effect, and that a force majeure event had not occurred, right? And we basically stated to say at the end of it, we said, look, we're still more than happy to, discuss making revisions to your agreement. We're still more than happy to continue this conversation.
Right.
We made that very clear. As much as everything that had already happened, as much as the damage that had already been done to us and everything else, we still made it very clear to say we're still willing to have this conversation, right?
Okay.
And that's above and beyond what we should be doing, because realistically speaking, if we wanted to, and again, this comes down to, so I think that a lot of people don't understand contract law, right? If you wanted to make them continue to play under the Pittsburgh Embers name, you'd need to go to a judge and you need to get an injunction, right? That's not going to happen. We're not going to get an injunction. Number one, because it's outstrippingly expensive to do so and not worth it in this situation. But number two, if we went to a judge and we asked for an injunction, chances are it won't be granted because it's hard to force somebody to perform. That's what it is. This is a performance independent contractor agreement, right? So forcing somebody to perform is incredibly hard.
It's also, same thing with another thing a judge would take into effect is also a $0 contract.
Sure, but it is legally binding in Pennsylvania, and that's we know that for a fact.
Okay.
So again, nothing that we're doing in our agreement is would be thrown out or is considered illegal or anything. Ultimately, we're willing to say that, look, if they choose to go down this path and they don't want to continue to talk to us, which is what it looks like, then that's fine. But ultimately speaking, there's damages to be collected there in that agreement. And again, people want to make us look.
What sort of damages are you looking at here? Are you looking at a monetary figure of damages, or
yes?
And
that has to do with the fact that.
Okay,
well, number one, so our contract length is, given the fact that we never made an adjustment, includes the automatic renewal clause, right? So ultimately speaking, basically, anything that we could prove that we would have had a benefit for in things like Pro League, for instance, is a monetary damage, right? And so on top of that, also, we have a very, very, very clear statement from the sponsor that we were working with in terms of what we're losing there, that we've lost as a direct result of this event, right?
So have you got a number in mind?
I'm not going to disclose that.
Or a ballpark figure?
No, I'm not going to discuss that at this time. It's just too early.
Okay.
Partly what that has to do with is the fact that it's, their agreement doesn't end, their initial agreement, let's say, is, end of season 11 or May 31st of 2020, right? And then an additional year after that. So realistically speaking, we could be looking at literally no action at all until the end of May of 2021, and then assessing that and saying, okay, I think the statute of limitations on that is 6 years.
That's a lot.
It is. It's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time. And these players, is it, one thing I've got, I would ask you, is it worth it?
We don't want to be doing this. If I haven't made that abundantly clear, I'm sorry, but we don't want to be doing this, right? And ultimately, the players have forced our hand in this, right? We don't have a choice. Ultimately, we have a choice to say, people say, oh, well, you don't have to go after them. That's fine, but again, I would make the same point to the Tfue and FaZe agreement to say, okay, look, FaZe is countersuing Tfue, which I applaud them for doing, because ultimately speaking,
but FaZe did make, in the FaZe agreement, FaZe did make large salary offers, which he refused.
Yeah, which he refused. And again, but the question isn't, and I think that this is where people get caught up in esports and everything else too, again, right? Offers are offers, it doesn't really matter. The contract is what it is. The agreement is what it is. If you sign an agreement, you should plan to uphold that full agreement. Right?
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but if I, as another org owner, turned around to you today and said, right, I'll buy them out of their contracts.
Sure.
What would you say to me?
I'd be happy to have that discussion, and I'd be happy to.
And if I said, so give me a ballpark figure.
I think as it sits right now, the expectation would probably be $10,000 per player. Is right now
per player.
Yeah, primarily due to damages in the future. That's what it is. If we release the agreements, if we sign a buyout with an organization, the problem is that we lose our right to pursue any action, right?
The question is, that seems incredibly high for a $0 investment.
It is. It is incredibly high, primarily because, again, you're protecting the right to pursue action, right? That's what it is.
Holding them for 2 years, that's what do you have to gain?
Well, what we have to gain is everything that we're losing by the fact that they're not upholding their agreement, right? Again, that's very clear, right? I'm not, and again, anybody who wants to make us out to be the bad guys for saying, oh, you're holding these players hostage. We're not holding anybody hostage. We're holding players to the agreements that they signed, right? That's not holding somebody hostage. And I think that I'll be completely honest with you, and as I'm sure that you're well aware, right? I've talked to lots and lots of what I'll call non-endemic, not only sponsors, but investors. And I'm going to talk about investors for a moment with this, right?
Yeah.
I think a reason why people get antsy about esports in particular is because of the fact that given in leagues where there's no infrastructure, where there's no enforceability, and where organizations don't own the spots and the players do, and again, that's fine. The issue is that there's so much instability in terms of saying, if I'm an investor and I'm going to pledge $1 million to this, right, that players could turn around and say, okay, well, I'm unhappy and I want XYZ, right?
Right.
And you say, okay, well, we can't financially give you XYZ, but we have a contract in place that says, look, you're going to do this for this, and we're upholding our agreement, so you need to uphold yours, right? And they say, okay, well, I'm going to hedge my bets to say that you're not going to come after me and sue me, so I'm just going to get up and leave, right? Because that's what I want to do, because I think I can do better elsewhere. That's not okay. And we need to, as an esport industry as a whole and as organizations, we need to say, look, you need to lay down the law to say, no, this isn't okay, and this is what's expected, right? And ultimately, the more and more immature...
That does work both ways, though, because
yes,
obviously the players need some protection from orgs taking advantage of them. Like I said,
of course,
being not paying anybody any money, and people just saying, well, it's our spot. Well, we'll just find you. We'll find someone else who'll do it for no money.
Sure.
I mean, the players need something for their hard work. I
Again,
mean, as far as I'm concerned, players are signed to a contract, and as long as there's an amicable relationship between both player and organization, it should be a bright future together.
Sure. And again, like I said, I'm not trying to say that the players don't deserve anything, or that we're trying to mistreat them or anything else, or take advantage of them or anything, right? Ultimately speaking, what it comes down to is the fact of perceived value, right? So in Challenger League, the question was ahead of time, and what they agreed on and everything else is to say, look, is there real net value in Challenger League, right?
Right.
We mutually agreed ahead of time that no, there wasn't. And I think a lot of organizations feel the same way. I mean, I saw the cash flow from Disrupt had posted on Reddit before to say, look, that the issue with Challenger League is that there's not a whole lot to gain from Challenger League. There's not a lot of viewership. Ubisoft doesn't promote it. You know this. Your team went through Challenger League, right? It's Challenger League is a whole different animal than Pro League, obviously. And so the question is, okay, well, is it worth anything? I don't know. That's a very subjective question. That's a very organization question, objective only within the organization itself that you can answer. And we can say, okay, well, we weren't paying them anything in Challenger League, and that's not okay, so that gives them a right to leave. It's like, no, that has nothing to do with it, right? Again, whether or not we came to an agreement or not on whether they should be worth something in Challenger League after the fact that they qualified and they changed their minds doesn't mean that we're somehow in the wrong, right? Or that the players are somehow in the right.
Okay.
So,
well, before we go too deep into this, we've already we're already way into the 30-minute mark right now.
Sure.
I was going to touch on Candor and that situation, but I think for the sake of it, for the time being, we'll just use the information that was already supplied.
Okay.
And we can talk about that.
I would take a look at the email that I sent Spencer from CGG originally.
Okay, if you have any more information that you want to send over to us that we can discuss outside of our conversation, we're more than happy to do so.
Okay.
All right. So I want to thank you for your time, Ryan. Obviously, if you have any more, if we have any more questions that come back, we can always sit down again and we can talk some more.
Sure.
All right. So thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Okay, that was Ryan Apple Labriola from the Pittsburgh Embers. Quite a difficult situation, it seems seems like we will definitely discuss this more in our next transition. It'll probably be a lot darker, and there'll be somebody sitting on that couch. But anyway, my initial feelings is this could have all been avoided. And I don't quite understand the $60,000 being put aside, but not willing to put in a $3,000 investment to avoid all this bad press. Somebody's dropped a ball there. But anyway, we'll continue talking about this